Water, January 25th meeting. And would you please stand and join us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Division 1?
Here.
Division 2?
Here.
Division 3?
Here.
Division 4?
Here.
Division 5?
Here.
Thank you.
All right. We're getting into strategic alternatives for the plan for water. And we're going to receive a presentation and provide input on alternatives for addressing future predicted unmet demands. Jennifer?
Thank you. Let's see. So just as a little housekeeping item, the folks that are at home, please feel free to participate by raising your hand, or you can also use the chat box and we will get your question immediately. The purpose of this particular presentation is to review the modeling results that were associated with the scenarios that were selected during the last Plan for Water meeting. I know it's been some time since we last met. I think that was in November. Was it November? I think it was. I think it was November 13th. Yep, it was.
I think it was.
It was before the holidays. There was a lot of modeling that had to be done, and then we also had some additional modeling tasks that were related to something else. So we are now back on track, and we do anticipate that there's probably only going to be 1 or 2 Plan for Water meetings left. So if the board recalls that the idea of the Plan for Water isn't necessarily to pick specific projects, but it is to, on a conceptual level, look at different options for addressing unmet demand, whether it be through conservation, operational changes, any slew of them. And we're going to go to the spreadsheet in a second, so we will talk a little bit about that because I think there has been some confusion. At the last Plan for Water meeting, there were several options that were offered the strategy options matrix, which is included in the staff report, and they are grouped by different items. So, and maybe Chris, can we? And anybody from who's in the audience, if you would like to speak, just please go to the podium so the folks at home can hear you. And you can go up whenever you want. Next slide. Do we have a clicker? Okay. Oh, it's fine. Megan can next slide it for us. I'll handle this first part, and then I'll send the technical things over. So Megan is going to review the modeling assumptions, review the strategic alternatives, and I will assist with that. We are going to look at the modeling results, and then we'll talk about next steps and receive some input on those items. So before, we will talk about the matrix in more detail in a second, but for now I'm going to turn it back over to Megan. Megan is stepping in for Jared today. He is homesick, but Megan probably knows oh, Jared's online. I hope you feel better, Jared. I don't know if everybody knows Megan, but Megan has been with HCR for some time, and Megan probably knows our system better than many of us do. So she is definitely an expert in the NID system. So with that, Megan, you want to go through your slides, and I'll take over back at the matrix.
Hello, everybody. Megan from HCR.
Welcome.
You can turn your camera on that little tablet. That's what helps.
I can show you the microphone.
Oh.
And bring it towards you.
Yeah, definitely.
Look at all the instructions.
Trevor, bring it closer to him also.
We're going to have to start.
This is what happens when you're the tech guy?
Yeah,
Yes, that's right.
We're going to have to.
This is what my parents think I do all day.
All right. So I've been part of the Plan for Water team, and we've been working on modeling some of the strategic alternatives. And so we've been using the SIM operations model that was developed for this process. And that model is a reservoir operations model, and it takes inputs from the IDC demand model, which was used to project what demands might be in the future. And then the it also takes input or outputs from the HEC HMS model, which simulates runoff, watershed runoff, under climate change conditions. So, later. Forgot that, technical thing. Okay, and then also it takes the regulatory requirements, environmental minimum flows and such, and it takes all those things and it simulates the watershed in the system and NID's reservoirs and diversions and such. And so the output from that model are summarized here on the slide: river flows, reservoir storage, diversions into canals, power generation, and raw water deliveries. So in summary, we are using 3 different projected climate change hydrologic inputs. And so they are representative of a future wet condition, a future median condition, and a future dry condition. And all 3 are equally likely. We have no idea what the future is going to look like, but we have 3, and they are bookends, essentially. They could go dry, they could go wet, but we have a representation of all 3. And the period of record for all 3 of those are 2022 to 2071. And so this is a summary of the IDC demand model inputs that we're using into the rest of the model. And so we've got 3 different representations of possible demand. We've got a high demand, a baseline demand, which is similar to current demand and trends, and then a low demand scenario. And the low demand scenario is as if there's 20% reduction in current demand. Yeah.
You answered part of my question. I couldn't find in my notes what the high demand and low demand were. So low demand was 20% reduction. So yeah. Could you remind me what both of those were?
They are 20% increase and 20% decrease, more or less.
Right.
Or less.
Low demand is 20% decrease, and the high off a baseline. Baseline does include an increase that is associated with historical increases.
Right.
Low demand was 20% lopped off of that, but remember, precipitation does come into play in the demand.
Yeah.
And then, high demand was essentially 20% more.
Yeah, it had, based on the, self-service area and how much that service area, self-service area gets filled.
Okay.
We had a higher percentage rate on the high demand that we assumed it would be a greater, infill of the self-service area.
Okay,
With the
so
high demand.
It wasn't,
baseline growth plus 20% for raw and treated water, and then minus 20%.
give or take,
Give or take.
it was a little bit more complicated than that. but-
20% on the low, the high end was more based on the self-service.
And it wasn't connection of the entire soft serve area, it was connection of the soft serve area, taking into account the location of a particular parcel, and then the historical average new connections we receive on an annual basis.
Gotcha, okay. I'll try to dig in, figure out.
And we can give you more, well, I can say.
Yeah, I know I have it someplace, I just couldn't find it in time for this. Michael?
Yes, Michael Ross. So could you please just go back and review exactly in the IDC model, what demand is being used in that model, that model? Because I believe you either use a physical proper plant demand model value for demand, or you can use a contracted water demand value. Could you go over that in each one of these scenarios, explain what actual IDC demand was put in the model, its characteristics, whether it's a physical plant type ET modeling, or whether or not it's something other like contracted water? And then also, when you say unmet demand or you project demand out into some forecasted modeling, what demand is used for that? I mean, are you just saying something like there's gonna be so many parcels that contract so much water, and we forecast that then that is the demand. So you get my idea, right?
You want more information on what
So
went into this?
Katie is online. We've also covered this over about 3 meetings, so we can send that data back out. And I do recommend anybody who has real specific questions, go back to the videos. But Katie, if you can hear us, can you chime in and just give a real quick summary? I don't want to spend the whole time reviewing demand again. On there.
All right, can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, good. Yes, so there's a number of presentations that go into this in much more detail. But kind of the basic thing to summarize perhaps, as you note, the IDC model, it is a simulation that's on a platform that the Department of Water Resources created that allows us to simulate both agricultural demands, like irrigation water based off of crop water requirements, but it also allows us to simulate urban water demands to some extent. So what we did in the demand model was for basically the raw water kind of agricultural customers, those demands were simulated based off of crop water requirements, essentially. So our understanding of kind of the climate effects on crops, but also the crop specific factors that impact demand. And then on the urban side, we also accounted for like population and per capita water use and so forth. And so we created a kind of a current scenario, and then starting from that model, then after we refined that to kind of match what's happening in the system now, we looked at different alternate future scenarios. So those factored in both the climate side changes that were looked at. So that would be precipitation and temperature. So looking at the impacts of those on particularly on the agricultural demand. So what crop water requirements might change with that. But there is some impact on the urban side as well. And we also looked at changes in the surface area of NID. So as mentioned about the kind of the soft service area. So those areas of NID that maybe, if there's growth, those areas that could be additionally served that are within close enough proximity to the service area, based on some kind of back and forth and understanding with the district about, what could, which parts of the district could realistically be served, and kind of expanding out to fill that. And then on the low demand side, kind of contracting down the demand based on a number of factors that are again documented in a couple other presentations, but we could provide certainly a lot more detail on that, but that's sort of the quick summary.
This is Director Tech. Can you remind us all what IDC stands for? I hate that. I know I asked that before and I just don't remember.
Yeah, so IDC, yes, it stands for the IWFM demand calculator. So unfortunately, it's a nested acronym. So the Department of Water Resources created kind of a much larger hydrologic model called the Integrated Water Flow Model. So that's the shorthand for that is IWFM. And so within that, which is a much larger model, they create applications of it for the state, kind of including groundwater and surface water, and it's a very detailed model. But one part of that is the IWFM demand calculator, which is the component that's used to simulate kind of those crop water demands, urban water demands, what's happening there on the land surface. So that's what IDC is. It's the IWFM demand calculator, but it's all part of that one big model that DWR developed.
Thank you for that reply. And when will the public be able to see the actual demand enumeration for the district with regards to the agricultural crop demand?
We're just going to figure out the best way to send it out. I'm not sure what that is, but we'll report back. I'm sure there's a way to do that.
I'm Joy Wade from Grass Valley, and last time when I spoke, time was running short and I got cut off, so this is about demand, so it seems like good time. So, and I'm just going to read this because it'll be faster. Now that the process for the plan for water is coming to a conclusion, it's time to complete missing pieces. There is general consensus that further disrupting our local ecosystem, new dam or raised dam, is a very last resort. It's so encouraging to see so many successful efforts to remove dams and restore the lifeblood of our ecosystem. Forward-thinking communities are hiring consultants to facilitate planning water futures. As I made you aware of at previous meetings, Watershed Progressive, based in Groveland, California, is a company I know of. They offer environmental planning, holistic landscape design, and education outreach services that include collaboration with the building department, the health department, city and county governments, nonprofit organizations, other local experts, and others. And all of these things would affect the consumptive demand. In testimony at public hearings considering Rise Gold's permit application, I have heard Jennifer Hansen appropriately explain the need for requiring a bond by Rise Gold to cover known and possible eventualities related to new NID water service to neighbors whose wells are dewatered. What I have not heard mentioned by NID is concern that according to the draft EIR, Rise Gold projects 2,500 gallons per minute be pumped out of mine shafts. This underground reservoir must be protected. Our community deserves management of this underground storage, which is not subject to evaporation. South Wolf Creek and the watershed all the way to the ocean needs to be protected. Please send staff to the Localizing California Waters Conference next November 2020.
All right,
Okay,
we can proceed.
one thing I want to point out to the board is that these numbers may look a little different than what you've seen before. When we took the numbers that Katie has provided us, we had used the October demand all the way across the month of October, and in actuality, NID's demand season ends in October 15th. So we modified our model inputs and our model scenarios to represent that. So this is the average annual demand going through with the irrigation season going through October 15th.
They're a little bit lower.
So it's
So
lower.
they're slightly lower.
Yeah. They're just slightly lower than what you've seen before because they cut that 2 weeks off.
Yeah, yeah. So if you see differences, that is why. Okay. So we have our inflow hydrology, we've got our demand assumptions. Let's go back one more time. So, we combine the dry climate hydrology and the high demand as one scenario, and then we combined the medium climate hydrology and the baseline demand. And then as a third scenario, we combined the wet climate and the low demand to create 3 different model scenarios. And these are the 1, 5, 9.
Yes,
If
right.
you remember that.
We remember that part.
So that is what these 3 represent here. And the color codings are gonna be consistent across the presentation to help you remember what you're looking at. Okay, so we run the model and we get these 3 scenarios, and this is an exceedance chart that shows the annual unmet demands. And so this is not in chronological order. We take every single year, we get the annual unmet demand, and then we order them from, greatest to smallest, and then we create an exceedance chart. So what this is showing is every single year in the period of record, and you can look on here and see what percentage of the time the demand is being able to be met at all times, and that's when it's on the 0. So anything above that is a year with unmet demand. And so you can see that under the dry climate, high demand, there's 84% of years, more or less, where we're gonna see unmet demand. And under the best case scenario, we've got unmet demand in about anything, 40% of the time. So these are just 3 possible realities of the future, but what these model results are showing is we're gonna see a lot more years with unmet demand.
When you run those calculations, is it a snapshot in time of that year only, or are you looking at carryover?
So this is carryover effect. So we have our hydrology is representative of 2022 to 2071, and we do a single simulation of
Each year.
Yeah, so when the results of 1 year feed into the next year and so on.
Okay.
So these are just 3 possible hydrologies out of many, but yes.
Thanks. Michael Ross again. Is it possible to look at this graph and say, well, that dry climate, high demand is really what nature is demanding on the side of the crop? That's what's being used. And then on the other side, it's showing what it can give, meet that demand, right?
So the demands are
But so the unmet demand, though, but the high dry climate, high demand, we're requesting that demand from what?
we're demand, so there are certain nodes in the model where we are, we remove water from the system. And so those are generally in Deer Creek. There are diversions out of the system, and then there are diversions off of the Bear River Canal, and then at Lake Combie. Those are our 3 major points of diversion within the raw water system. And so at those major points, that is where we are estimating how much unmet demand is not being met. So how much water is available within the system, and then how much can be used for, to meet demand.
So what Michael's saying is basically true, right? The idea is that we're projecting what this demand, what we're asking for in order to meet this high demand scenario. And what Mother Nature is providing us is this. And so that graph is telling you that for the dry scenario, 90% of the time, Mother Nature isn't meeting our demand that we're requesting.
So why would we expect it?
Well, so remember the scenarios that I'm not quite sure what that, but so the dry climate hydrology input goes into the reservoir operations model, and the high demand input goes into the reservoir operations model. They're not inherently linked. We just link them for the basis of how they look at.
Right. We've got a worst case scenario and a best case.
Yes,
Yeah.
they're not, there's no linkage besides that's what we selected out of that table of 9.
I understand, but
Okay.
I'm choosing to think about it.
Hey, Michael? Yeah, you're commenting, I couldn't hear.
I'm fully aware of what the graph is showing. I'm a civil engineer for 30 years. So I'm just giving an alternative way of thinking about how we choose to think about demand and where all the availability for demand is coming from. So looking at the graph, that's how I see it. I see it not only from the perspective of something that's unmet, but something that can't really be delivered by nature for that demand. That's clear enough.
Is one of your points talking about the 3 nodes, that there may be water in one part of the system that it can't get to the other part where it's needed?
That's, yes,
And you take that
Yeah.
into consideration in the model, or you assume it's a big pool?
correct.
So,
Yeah, so we simulate the upper reservoirs, we've got Bowman and Jackson Meadows, and then that water is conveyed over to Spalding, and then at that point, it can be diverted out towards the Durham Canal or the South Yuba Canal and over to Deer Creek. And so based on the available resources in the upper reservoirs, upper systems, then it can be conveyed down to the lower system where the demands are. And if that water isn't able to be captured, or it's drought conditions and it doesn't actually follow rain or snow, then there's just no water available.
And remember that the model is also doing certain things in terms of priority, right? It's identifying that we want a minimum carryover storage. It's identifying that we have the new in-stream per flow requirements. So it's meeting those before it tries to meet the individual demands. So that's being incorporated in there. If those two items weren't in there, then, these would look different as more demand would be met. But we have to include those options as part of our overall demand, and they have the hierarchy within the model.
We move water out of the Yuba watershed into the Bear River watershed, and so that's where some of the limitations come in. Like,
So we take the output from these three scenarios and we develop an average annual unmet demand. And so going forward, we're kind of gonna condense our period of record runs down to these average annual statistics. So, the data from the previous chart, if you turn it into an average annual number, these are the average annual unmet demand. So for the dry climate high demand, it's 35,000 acre feet. The median is, somewhere around 14,000 acre feet. And then the wet is maybe 6.
I have a question. It appears from what I remember that the unmet demand was, this is improved on this chart from what we,
Yes.
is that true?
Great point. Thank you. So there's a couple of things went into that. So the new demands, the reduced demands from October 31st back to October 15th, so that reduced the amount of total demand in the system.
Okay.
And then we also looked at optimizing reservoir operations for climate change a bit more. We really looked at the system to make sure that, we had developed our reservoirs rules generally for existing conditions that make sense with today's hydrology and snowmelt and runoff and capture and such. And so we just went back and looked at each one of the reservoirs a little closer and looked to see if, like, under climate change, would they really operate like we've got it set up now? And so we made some small tweaks to better optimize the water.
Okay.
But so those are the two changes that have significantly caused the demands, unmet demands to
This
go down.
is good news,
So,
because when we first started this process years ago, we were talking about 50,000 shortage, and now we're at 35, so that's good news.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
And I appreciate that you guys are kind of honed in, and just really, or honed in, dug in, whatever term you want to use, but really to fine tune those demand numbers.
Yeah.
Right.
Especially with on the operations side. I've always wondered if we couldn't get more out of the system by tweaking our operations.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I ask a question about those last 2 weeks? So do you use some sort of a model that is indicative of how much raw water is being used? Or is like on a day-to-day, week-to-week, I don't know, month-to-month basis? Or is it the total amount you divide it by that many days and it's an average? I'm wondering, when you reduce that last 2 weeks, is that like actual usage or is it an average over the whole season?
So we were given monthly average
And it's
demand.
different for each month?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And so we didn't try to, we didn't try to
Just
squish it all
divided
into
that last
two.
month by 2?
Yeah,
That's
no,
fine.
yeah, we have the
Okay.
last month
Yeah.
and then applied that there.
Okay, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
So remember one of the requests, which we could talk about a little bit, was to also take a look at what would happen with demands related to extended irrigation season. And so
Right.
that would be extending it by 2 weeks. And the numbers actually tie out fairly well to what Chip and the operations team actually put into the canal. So I think that's another validation of the model.
Yeah, my concern, which I don't have it anymore, is that October's gonna be a heavy month, right?
Yeah.
And it's only gonna continue to grow.
Okay, so these are gonna be our 3 baseline scenarios that we're gonna compare our alternatives against.
All right, we're gonna talk about the potential strategic alternatives matrix that we visited last time. Real quick, we're not gonna go line by line like we did before.
Also have
Chris is
2 weeks back in, that extending.
And just have to zoom in so we can see the left column. Yeah. It's also in the board packet, in part of the staff report. So the purpose, we utilized the operations matrix, and it was based off of input we received through these meetings, through the stakeholder group, and then we proposed, or basically presented a variety of options. So we had originally talked about, and these are different strategies that could be utilized by the district to reduce unmet demands in the future. And there's a whole slew of items that are possibilities, and a lot of them are feasible. So if you recall, the plan for water is that once we've identified something to move forward into the process, then we will start addressing those to develop specific projects in the master planning process for the extent that that is what serves as the basis for us to develop our capital improvement programs that get incorporated into the budget on an annual basis and then also fold into rates. So everything kind of, we're going kind of at that big macro level plan for water, and then we'll further get defined in master planning, which further gets defined in 5-year capital improvement programs, which then goes into 1-year capital improvement programs, that then goes into the budget, and then finally gets built. So that's kind of the method to the madness. So the strategy spreadsheet is very high level. It is not overly detailed. It is not intended to be overly detailed. So I'm going to take questions after I'm done, Michael. So when you go through, the strategies are grouped by different types of options. So we have, and this is going to show how bad my eyesight is. We have operations, we have watershed management, we have canal improvements, and then we have storage augmentation, demand management. I think that's it. So if you go to the right side, and those of you who don't have this in front of us, it's going to be a little hard to follow at home because this spreadsheet is really small and big. So there's a column that says further consideration, yes or no, modeling required, yes or no, and document to be addressed in. And so that is intended to identify, would it be included in a master plan? How would we move forward with those items? There has been some comments made that because the district only modeled additional storage augmentation, that that's what the district is intending to do, is only build storage. And that's not the case at all. So the reason why some of these other options weren't modeled is because it wasn't necessary to model them. So the model already has built in through the demand, where we had the 3 demand scenarios, and the low demand scenario already includes both the drought contingency plan, which has different stages of conservation required by stage, and then it also lops another 20% off of the top. Additionally, the model is building in a lot of the in-stream flow requirements already for the new FERC license, which will inherently adjust how we are operating to ensure we can meet those new commitments. But because we have been looking at an annual average unmet demand, it's not necessary to continue to model little reductions in demand that we could get from a variety of kind of this larger suite of options through conservation or canal automation, because we're not going to be able to well define them because the projects are on such a micro level. We're talking about very small projects that are going to be done on specific canals. So you can make some assumptions on that it would reduce the unmet demand kind of on a one-to-one basis, whereas storage doesn't necessarily address your unmet demand on a it's not like you build 1 more acre foot of storage, you get 1 more acre foot of supply, because the system's more complicated than that because of how we deliver water and how we move it between the watersheds. So the options that were selected to move forward for modeling were only selected because those were selected based on input from this group, from the public, from the board, and it was the type of options that were selected to move forward. Those are the ones that lend themselves to modeling. Some of these other items do not lend themselves to modeling, and we already have a pretty good handle on demand reductions and how that helps us in the future through the current scenarios we already have, so we didn't feel additional modeling was needed.
Jen, could you give an example for the public and those at home, an example of an alternative that doesn't require further modeling because we're already doing it, for instance? Like
Yeah.
meadow restoration, or what
Could do it.
or could do it.
Meadow restoration is a good one, so we are already doing meadow restoration. Some of the biggest challenge with meadow restoration is there is some book value for water storage improvements and water, basically delays runoff for
Right.
the watershed. What those improvements are, there's not a whole lot of data that we would feel comfortable with putting into a model that is been validated with large scientific basis. What we are doing with the English Meadows Project is we have pre-project modeling, we're gonna be doing post-project modeling, and in fact, we are coordinating also with Circle on their meadow project so that we can hopefully collect the same metrics and data points so that we have a larger suite of data. So that is a project that it just isn't going to make that big of a difference in supply to need to model besides a kind of assumption that we made, which was made off of previous literature review.
Right.
The other item we get a lot of questions about is costs. So costing these items out, specifically the smaller ones, is extremely difficult. We came up with very, very large assumptions. When you're talking about canal automation or metering, we kind of have to go, okay, we have this many feet of canal, this is what we think it costs per linear foot, or this is what we think it costs per box that we would replace with a meter. Then we add some contingencies on it. We try to think about labor costs, and then we come up with a cost per linear foot and come up with this larger number. Those are the type of projects that one project can be X for this project, and that could be X times 4 for this project because of where it's located, complexities associated with infrastructure or the topography or whatever is going on. That is why those really lend themselves to being evaluated better in the master planning process. Because once again, the master planning process, especially with a lot of the canal automation items, which I think is very important for this district to do, is that we will start and go, okay, where are we going to get the best bang for our buck? Where do we have data coming in, whether it's from the field staff letting us know what their experiences are operating those canals over 30 years, to how we understand where we do have meters and what those automatic reads are. And so that are the gauges. So that will help us to be able to cost out real projects, but that really needs to be done more on that micro level, on a project specific location level. And that will be done in the master planning process and then incorporated into the budgeting process through the 5-year CIP and then into the budget. The cost estimates, we did get some concern expressed related to the cost estimates that we provided for the storage augmentation. So one of the, I know that historically there has been a lot of concern expressed by the community and our stakeholders that the cost estimates for storage, there's no way that they can be accurate and they have to be wrong. Well, that could be true. We have reviewed the cost estimates that were prepared by a well-renowned engineering firm, and can I see off the top that there's some things missing? Absolutely, I can. Can I also tell you that since 2017, construction prices have increased? We know that. We've been dealing with it on a basis here, right here at the board. Are there larger environmental mitigation items missing? Is there right-of-way missing? Is there demo for tree removal missing? Yeah, it's missing. I can tell you. I looked at it. But I don't know that it matters because we're trying to compare apples to apples, and so we're trying to get a magnitude of cost. And those same items are missing from the cost estimates for the Rollins raises as they are for the Centennial project. So because we are just trying to get a cost comparison, it's not worth it right now from a time perspective to go through and do this detailed cost analysis for what we're doing. If the board were to decide to move forward with storage augmentation project, yes, I would recommend we do a brand new cost estimate, just so that we can make sure it's all inclusive and that it's brought up to today's dollars. Now, with that said, because of the concerns that we have heard with the cost estimates that were included before we even prepared the matrix, and given that they're old and we know that they're missing a couple of major components, we did go through and take it is specific to Centennial, the cost in the engineer's preliminary cost estimate was a range. For the purposes of this analysis, we took the top end of the range, and then we escalated it by the ENR, which is the inflation index you use for construction projects, for the time period between when this document was prepared to today. We then added a 40% contingency on top of it.
Wow.
And we did that because that's more reflective of environmental mitigation, tree removal. There's going to be significant permitting, a whole slew of unknowns that weren't really fleshed out in this. It was a well-done cost estimate, but it was very simplistic and very, very limited to kind of that actual construction line item.
I was gonna say, just what the dam cost to build.
Yeah, and that's all it was.
Right.
There is another concern that we did not include debt service into the cost. Absolute debt service would be cost. We do not have the cash to go build any one of those larger storage augmentation. So because of that, whether it's, building larger storage augmentation, or I think there was canal encasement that was, in the billions of dollars, something, a lot of money. If you're going to do a project of that nature, you're going to have to look at districts such as ours. We're going to have to look at a comprehensive financing package that doesn't just, it includes cash, it includes bonds, it includes grants, and in a lot of these situations, it also includes funding partners. That same concern is equal to any of the large storage raises. So we didn't choose to speculate where we would fall within that financing package. So that debt service was just left off so we could just look at construction costs. Remember, we are at a very low level. If the district were to decide to go towards actually looking at a large storage augmentation project, we would have to do a full financial analysis and develop a real plan. That's not what the purpose of this matrix is. So I can assure you, there's some comments that, we're not disclosing what the interest or debt payments, and that was on purpose, and we did disclose that at the last meeting. So we are well aware of how to bond for projects and putting together financial packages. It's just so early in the game, it would be so speculative. I would have to give you a range of what that would cost. I don't know what grants, what state funding, I don't know any of that. So would we bond for all of it? You can make all the worst case scenarios you want. So that was the reason why we didn't include that. But like I said, if you were to move forward, you would include it. The items that were modeled, as I said, are the items that lend themselves to additional modeling. The other options do not lend themselves to additional modeling. So there was some misconception with the public that was a sign that we've already picked storage, and I can assure you that is not the case. It was because that was what we could actually model versus what we couldn't. Did I miss anything?
Well said. Well, very well said.
Does anyone have any, we do have a question. Laura Peters says, please post the preliminary cost estimate that the reported estimate is based on. And
It's on the website.
Yeah.
I looked at it today.
it is on the website already, and
It's
we
on
can.
the Centennial website, to be really clear, that's where it is.
Okay,
Because I pulled all those, as I shared with you. I did a lot of research, and that's where it is.
okay, so we're gonna move off of the matrix, and so what the plan, and we'll get to the next steps, but after we review these modeling results, we're gonna have some conversations about what next steps likely are, and then receive some input, and then we'll have additional dialogue. So I think, Chris, we're ready to go back to the presentation. Oh, we have somebody with their hand raised, hold on. Gary Zimmerman is raising his hand. Gary, please go ahead and make your comment. You need to unmute yourself, Gary.
Okay, sorry about that. I appreciate the opportunity to comment, especially on the costs. I'm an economist and I've taught environmental economics and done a lot of analysis of things like this. I just think that you have to include some estimate, even if you include a range of what the additional cost will be of the financing. You can't just assume that you're, not going to have to pay when you're borrowing $300 to $1 billion, that you're going to get somebody that's going to give you the money, or you're going to have to borrow most of that. And this is a small district that doesn't have a lot of customers to share those costs on. So the numbers that you're looking at in terms of the cost of construction only, you could very easily end up with double that. And so, you're now looking at thousands of dollars of increases, tens of thousands in some cases of increases per year for ag customers based on what the construction costs. So you essentially 50% or doubling the increase with just the financing. That wouldn't even include probably cost overruns, which and the fact that prices of construction have gone way up. So I do think you need to, just for purposes of all of these, some accuracy on all of the various combinations of things to do, including net new storage, other ones as well. You should probably include some financing on the ones that require financing. And that of course gets complicated because you have to worry about, your funding sources, borrowing capacity. I think you have about $37 million outstanding now, but some of these projects would borrow close to $1 billion. So, how much debt can NID issue is a really important, feasibility constraint that's not addressed here. Maybe there should be a column for financial feasibility, to help separate some of these, because there are real risks there. If the borrowing, if your bond rating falls, it will cost a lot more. If the amount of borrowing rises, your risk premiums will likely rise on the bonds, so that will cost more. And there's even the risk that the customers won't be able to pay. If you start adding $10,000 per $5,000 or $10,000 per ag customers, some of them may be out of business or have to change their business. So if the worst case scenario, bankruptcy because they can't generate enough revenues, because you're losing customers, what does that do to NID customers? And I am one. So, well, thank you very much. And you've got a lot to consider, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate.
All right, just for clarification, we are not saying we
add my economic comments.
Yeah, just for clarification, staff is not suggesting in any way, shape, or form we wouldn't cost out financing. It wasn't done for the purposes of this matrix due to where we're at in the process. So if storage alternatives were to move forward, yes, of course we would. And they are very expensive. And there are also a lot of other capital expenditures that the district is going to be facing that are not related to unmet demands in the future that we'd have to take consideration of. So when you look at those all holistically, you really have to look at the longer term financial package. Okay.
Yeah, Gary, we're fully aware of your concerns and the mitigation costs and the financing costs and the effect on our customer.
All right, and then now I see Mr. Linton has his hand raised.
Hi, yeah, thanks. I just have one quick question, one quick comment. Gosh, it was probably a year ago or more now, but when we were looking at the raw water management plan, what we identified was that there was really a lot of vague information within the report, and then we had identified that there were more modern technologies that we could be utilizing, like satellite imagery, to try and get a better analysis of how much of the property of our existing customers was actually being utilized. And one of the big problems that was identified at that time is that the pastures, it was just such a broad category all encompassing, but there was no further breakdown of what that was being used for, whether it was ranching or commercial, an actual commercial, or just for aesthetic landscaping. And so my question is, has that been effectively remedied? Are we using modeling scenarios that actually take into consideration satellite and actual imagery? Because as we all know, the biggest problem within our system is the inability to really measure how much water a lot of the customers are using. We can't measure the volume they're using, and also too, we don't have a good measurement of the extra water within the system that just kind of gets fed back in, or just goes out into other areas. So, and my concern is that without that data, if we just, very briefly, if we just go back in time, the reason we started all of this was for the water rights application, and written in there is that the purpose of the water was to send to San Joaquin Valley and Sacramento Valleys. And then, immediately after that, then we had NID essentially advertising to the rest of the state that they could send water from the Centennial Water Supply Project as far as Los Angeles and farther. And so, and because we had members of this board campaigning, to push forward Centennial even before starting this discussion of feasibility, my concern is that if we put if the goal was to put the cart before the horse, to find ways to make this demand inflated, that then we might be utilizing less supported data that would actually give us a better explanation of how that's possible and if it's even needed. Thank you.
Great. That was a good comment. I do recommend anybody who is not familiar with how the demand model is developed that you re-watch those, because we did use satellite data. It was tied to actual crop use. It is not just projected based off of some book value. We tied everything back to historic. So there's a lot of really good data in there. I do recommend that you re-watch those. All right.
So can I add one other thing? Those demand models, the specific ones that you're talking about, are also on the Centennial website. There's an enormous amount of data.
The old models?
No, I think they were part here.
New models have been developed.
Right.
We've developed a new demand model that is not on the Centennial website.
I got that, but I'm just saying something, so that at least it shows the broader what has been considered, which you considered all of those before, you just tweaked the numbers. Is that correct?
No, we did a whole new
Okay.
demand model. The demand model that we did for this process is an entirely new model. The only historical data that was used is basically actual delivery numbers, because that is how we go through and calibrate the model and it feeds into it. But land data was utilized in the development of it. All of those videos are on the website and the Plan for Water website, and so there is I know it's a lot we've gone through a lot over the past 2 years, so I definitely don't expect everyone to remember, but there is just a plethora of data in those particular meetings. I can assure you that the demand is not, there's no intention of overflating demand, and in fact, we actually reduced demand by finding a error in the previous assumption on an irrigation date. So we are trying to do our best. We have 2 comments from Mrs. Peters.
I have one thing.
Oh, yes, sir.
Thanks, Chip.
Yeah.
I know you turned it down.
Yeah. I know, it's been awful.
And to state, the demand is not based on what people are purchasing, but what they're
No.
actually using and we're delivering.
And that's the
Correct.
point I wanted to make.
Yeah.
It's also not based on the crop reports that are part of the spring data collection process
No.
of your irrigation season. So that is not part of the analysis at all.
And the grid stuff that we went through was pretty impressive.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm a skeptic, so I looked into it pretty deep, and I went to his office, so
Yeah.
I appreciate the work that was done there.
I think demand is pretty dialed in, but we will,
But we're not using the August 2014 satellite picture either during the drought.
no,
Right,
no.
that's right.
No, and we will provide the data for those of you who want to take a look at it. So I'm just going to read 2 quick comments. We're an hour in and we're not even into the actual meat of the slide. So we're going to get going. The offer of water to this is from, Laura Peters, the offer to water to Southern California was in the AWWA pitch for the Prop 1 grants. And then, I'm not sure what, she also asks, is actual delivery water contract water? Not quite sure what that means. Laura, if you can provide a little bit of clarification, we'll try to answer that one. Okay, ready.
Okay. So, there were a subset of strategic alternatives that we did model, and so they are summarized on this slide. We have 2 Rollins storage increases, one of 10,000 acre feet and one of 50,000 acre feet. And then we also did a scenario where Centennial was built, and that has a capacity of 110,000 acre feet. So we've got those 3 alternatives, and then we have our 3 baseline runs: the dry high, the median baseline, and the wet low. So with the 3 alternatives and the 3 baseline runs, we ended up with 9 model runs. Does that make sense? Okay.
Can, just so I can picture this, for the 10,000 and 50,000 acre feet raise, what is that, what's that in inches for the dam? Like how much taller is the water line?
Now, in terms of the 10,000, it's basically related to the labyrinth weir, which is something the district looked at back in the 80s. And that's relatively small. That's probably somewhere in the 6 to 7 foot range in terms of additional elevation and height. The 50 foot, I believe, was
50,000 acre?
The 50,000 acre foot was somewhere in the 40, I'd have to go back and look, it was somewhere in the 40, 45 foot increase in the reservoir height.
Okay.
To be able to handle that.
We're talking about 6 feet to 40-ish feet.
Physically, in terms of the water.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm going to first talk about the strategic alternatives, and then at the end, we're going to talk about the additional request by the board to simulate an extended irrigation period through October 31st. So basically taking our original demand numbers.
Right.
And putting them back in.
After you tweak
We fixed the demand, and now we're adding it back.
We're adding it back in.
Okay, so, this next set of slides, I'm gonna go through each one of these, strategic alternatives and talk about them in a little more detail. So we're gonna start with the Rollins 10,000 acre feet raise. So that's equivalent to a 15% storage capacity increase at Rollins. And it adds operational flexibility to meet both demands in the Bear River Canal and Lake Combie because of its location in the system. It enables less water needed to be exported from the Yuba River system into the Bear River, so making more water available in Deer Creek. So, and we assumed that the minimum pool elevations and the recreational pool elevations in Rollins remain the same. So the storage was just on top of that, and everything else remained as is.
On the previous pool, is less water needed to be exported versus doing nothing?
Well,
Or
so
versus the other options?
where water is brought over from Jackson Meadows and Bowman, and then at Spalding, I talked about the 2 different paths it can take.
Yeah.
So if it's sent down the drum system, it ends up in Rollins. And with the additional storage there, the reservoir can store more natural inflow.
Okay,
And
so you would
then-
need to send less.
So less imported water is needed in the Bear system, and so that water can be shifted over to Deer.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the question. And we assumed that the minimum in-stream flow requirements in the Bear River all stayed the same, and which may or may not be the case by adding storage.
Right, so that is the biggest assumption that is likely not true. Whenever you're doing these types of projects, you would require a new 401 certification, and they would likely extract quite a bit of water through that process in-stream flows. So, but for the purposes of modeling, we had to choose something, so we chose the current in-stream flows. But just beware that that would likely be increased, because that's what we're seeing with the whole Bay Delta plan, unimpaired flows, and voluntary agreements, and our experience going through the FERC relicensing project.
We could increase it by 10,000 acre feet and then increase our in-stream flow requirements by 10,000 acre feet.
It'd probably get up to half the water.
Half the water?
Half the water?
It'd be quite close. I mean, we're just speculating, but it would be an extraction, yes. So the benefit you see would likely be less, because it is a total speculation on what they would require.
And that's true for all the storage projects we're talking about, is that true?
Yeah, we just don't know. We can't read the tea leaves on
Is
it.
it some percentage of the new storage capacity or total storage capacity now?
It would likely be of the new storage capacity, but that's also, I'm just speculating. That would be what I would guess.
Like what we were talking about.
And would this require, additional, tapping into our water rights in order to facilitate this additional water? In order to,
We would have to move the water right on, the Centennial water right to there. I don't know, that's not that much water.
But we have some existing water rights that can probably cover
This small one?
the 10 and 50.
oh, that's my question right there.
Do you think for the 50 though?
It would be marginal, we'd have to have discussions with close. But
Yeah, we'd probably cover the 10.
Okay.
We'd have to evaluate the 50 more. And then Centennial obviously would need that new water right.
So in this case, or with a 50,000 acre fit, how does that affect, what is available to Placer County? Because I know they do that.
I don't know that we have that number off at the top of our head.
So the Placer County Water Agency gets their water from PG&E. And so there is, even though it's a shared system, there's essentially two pots of water, and they don't mix. They're not, NID does not take PCWA water.
Are you talking about what we deliver to Placer County, or are you talking about what PCWA delivers?
They get when you raise.
Oh, that's all separate, so that's all taken further up, so they wouldn't be impacted. The water supply that PCWA gets from PG&E is protected by contract. The supply we can tap into from PG&E is protected by contract.
Okay. So, moving on, but still talking about the Rollins 10,000 acre foot raise. So the reservoir fills in most years, and this is similar, very similar to the baseline scenarios without the raise. And this is a table showing the frequency of years that have full delivery allocation. So we've got our three scenarios, and the first row in that table is the no storage increase, so that's basically our baseline. So we get full allocations in 41, 70, and 76% of years, and then with the Rollins storage increase, you can see the percentage of years increase, which is about 6, I think, in each of those scenarios.
1,000 acre feet.
1,000 acre.
Always have
Can you go back to, just,
Yep.
I'm almost there. So we're getting about 15% more storage at Rollins, but for the whole system, we'd end up with simulated numbers of about 6% extra stored.
Well, 15%, I'm sorry, 15% would be increase in storage,
Yeah,
but the 6% would be kind of the net ability to deliver.
yes.
Yeah,
It's more-
we get, this table gets confusing because of where it says no storage increase, that's no project.
Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
important distinction though, because people say, well, 15% more here, they assume 15% more water.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
really You gotta build 15 to get 6.
So
Yeah.
the allocation is dependent on the drought contingency plan, the drought management.
Right.
And so based on conditions on, remind me what it is, March 1st or March 31st, what's in storage, and you figure out how much water you have available for the year, and then you set your allocation for the year, and then you can make your deliveries based on that number. And so that's what's in this table here, is how many years have a full allocation, so 100% allocation on that.
Okay, so I didn't understand.
Yeah, so
This is 6% more years would have a full.
6% more years would have a full allocation.
Thank you for explaining, and totally.
Yes.
I'm also wondering with these two facilities that you're considering, how that would affect landowners around Rollins Lake and how much land would be taken away from property owners.
Yep. There would be some inundation. Do we have inundation maps from?
We did some preliminary inundation maps based on the increases capacity.
In comparison to a Centennial, it's
Yeah,
way less,
Rollins
do
is
you recall?
relatively steep in most areas, in terms of the slopes, et cetera, so the impact of going up 15, 20, 30, 40 feet in terms of the private properties is considerably less. They may be impacted, but they may not be impacted in terms of the residents. This means that they have a shorter distance to walk down to the lake. But there are a couple of properties that would be impacted.
And isn't it true that we already own 100 feet of land around Rollins Lake? Something like that?
I don't know that it's consistently 100 around.
Okay, well,
We'd have to
that
look.
was the original,
Yeah.
layout.
That's what I remember, but it may not be true in all.
Okay, so moving on to some considerations on this scenario. The cost to benefit ratio, I understand it's pretty high.
One of the challenges with this project in consideration of costs is that because they're existing facilities that are old facilities, we never quite know what DSOD is going to make us do to improve dam safety or to bring things up to current standards. So on a one-to-one basis, a retrofit of a facility is oftentimes more expensive than building a brand-new facility that you can immediately build to standard. So there were some cost estimates that were completed that are extremely old. So, if this were a consideration, those would have to be redone.
When you say facility, you're talking about the dam structure?
The weir, yep. So they basically raise the weir.
We'd also have to raise the dam a little bit, cut into the core slightly and raise it up a little bit as part of that condition, that freeboard, et cetera. So there's a bunch of pieces.
And that's what we think can get costly with the new dam requirements.
You're not expecting powerhouse retrofit, like them coming in and,
No.
The bottom end of
so just a.
Yeah.
So, do they require a gap, a minimum elevation above the spillway to the top of the dam? And these-
Yeah, there's
Mhm.
a bunch of different pieces going into it, but they look at wave runoff, et cetera, at the PMS event, so how much water is sitting up as it's trying to push through the spillway, et cetera, yeah.
Makes
There's
sense.
a bunch of pieces to that.
How do you get an accurate estimate of cost, when you have that DSOD factor out there that you don't really know what they're gonna require to do?
You ultimately need more studies.
Yeah, you need more and more studies. It's very, very costly to get very accurate. I mean, you could have some preliminary conversations based off of inspection reports we've already had and comments we've already received. We can make some assumptions, but you add some pretty significant contingencies into those types of cost estimates.
So, would you say then that our cost estimate would go up dramatically?
Yeah, I could tell you, I am 100% positive it will go up.
Right.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
I mean, it's the order of magnitude.
Yeah,
right.
these are, to get accurate cost estimates, it takes a lot of effort. So the idea now is to have these initial conversations to see if there's even interest in moving forward with anything. And then if there is interest, then there's a lot of work to be done.
Right.
And this just restate, that we're in the walking stage,
Yeah.
Right.
maybe crawling.
Crawling
Yeah.
stage, yes.
Yeah, do these preliminary, thoughts about the raising of Rollins Dam, they should likely consider some type of sediment trap in the headwater of the reservoir in order to prevent further sedimentation of the reservoir. So there are some engineering designs that can be looked at. It will increase the cost, but then it may prevent significant sedimentation.
Absolutely, that's one of the things, we haven't gone into details, but that would clearly be one of the things we would be looking to mitigate on Rollins. Minimize how much more sediment come in, whether that's a debris dam or other methods.
Yeah.
So we try to minimize that, we keep clean so that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want to say too, is that, for ground truthing, the area, if you look at, the amount of sediment that comes down from Steep Hollow Creek, if you go there and you see it, I mean, I'm just astounded every year when I come and see how much more has been traveling into Rollins Reservoir and filling it up, and it's like, one time I was down there and it was like a forest of bushes down there all the way up Steep Hollow Creek, a long way. It was like, there was only a path for the four-wheel drive vehicles to get through, and otherwise it was this forest of bushes. Next time I come back, you know, it was a number of months later, all of that was gone. I had no idea how that could have been gone. I mean, I didn't see any evidence of tractors or anything like that was pulling the bushes out. I mean, the water coming down there actually take all that material out of there? I have no idea how that can happen, how much of that debris goes into reservoirs. Amazing.
Okay. Additional considerations. So a small raise requires extensive dam modifications. We've hit that one pretty good. Disruption to operations. It will require the lake to be run at lower levels during construction, and that will affect recreation.
And deliveries.
Probably less so on the delivery side.
Yeah.
On a typical year. It would be recreation and or, generation revenue, as the reservoir has to be sitting lower in elevation, which means not gonna have as much head on the turbine to spin.
So 54% of our water goes through there. Placer County and South Nevada County. Delivery shouldn't be interrupted at all. Not much, okay?
Not much. Okay, moving on to the Rollins 50,000 acre foot raise. So that is equal to a 75% storage capacity increase at Rollins. And so these are similar. So I'll go quickly through them. Adds operational flexibility to meet the Bear River Canal and Lake Kobe demands because of its location in the watershed. Less water needs to be exported from the Yuba River into the Bear River. This is what we were talking about, being able to shift some of that water over to Deer Creek. Same minimum pool, recreation pool as the baseline scenarios. And same minimum flow requirements. So, Rollins is still able to fill in most years, so there's plenty of water. And this is that similar table, the frequency of full delivery allocation, and because you have so much more storage in Rollins, that increases your potential carryover storage, which helps your allocation calculation. And so you can see that there's a significant increase in years with full allocation with the Rollins 50,000 acre foot raise.
So is it a 1-to-1 since it raises 50,000 acre feet? We're saving 50,000 feet from having to be transported from the Yuba River watershed?
No.
What is there a ratio?
There will be numbers summarizing that later on, but it's a fraction. It's a fraction of that.
There might be 50,000 here. So,
Because some of the water that's going into Rollins is coming from the Bear River watershed, so it's not gonna be 1-to-1.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
We're still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see.
But
We're
yeah,
not counting on
there's-
rainfall.
Well,
Build that sort of snowpack.
Rollins
Because
still
it's a small
relies
water
on
shed.
imported water.
it still relies on imported water, but
But
that's why it's not
Not as
one-to-one.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So additional considerations for this scenario, again, the cost-benefit ratio, extensive dam modification, disruption to operations. So in addition to the previous ones we've already talked about, also the impact to hydropower generation during construction.
So one of the questions that I've got for both of these options is sort of this, comes back to more policy management, with more water, and this idea that if there's more water, somebody might see that as more water for sale, and especially if it's an expensive project and they're looking for more revenue. What's the policy legality thoughts around the idea that if hypothetically we're adding 50,000 acre feet, really that's trying to get ahead of this future worst case climate scenario of dry and high demand, and that it can't be then immediately allocated to new, to more expansion, new raw water demand, those kinds of things. Is there any ability to kind of, save it for a rainy day? The analogy is that every time it's wet in Southern California, there's, hundreds of acres of new almonds, and all of a sudden they can't live without even more water, and not wanting to find yourselves in that kind of scenario.
Yeah, it's a little bit legally tricky because the district would have to implement a moratorium, and there would be some considerations with the water code and available water supply and denying new connections. So we would have to tap into Destin to better understand that. Moratoriums, I've never seen a moratorium that happens when you have a full supply, but that doesn't mean it couldn't.
And we also have to take into consideration the time to construct, right? It might not be done for 30 years.
Right.
And we might be in that worst case scenario by then.
Yeah.
If we snapped our fingers, I understand what you're saying, like, if it was built today, you wouldn't want to go sell all that water.
Right.
You want it 30 years from now.
30 years, if somebody's investing in water speculation is absolutely an industry, and so, I don't know, thinking about that, like, just because there's, like, it's gonna be 50,000 acre feet, but it can't be spoken for because it's making up for the debt.
Yeah, I'd also look at it from the perspective of that new development in Placer County and even in Nevada County, especially Nevada County, is limited to smaller residential, and that's all treated water.
Yeah.
And that is a drop in the bucket compared to raw water use. And so a moratorium on treated water, I don't know that ever makes sense.
Right, it's raw water to.
Only possible to develop in Nevada County would be Newtown.
But you're not gonna see the development you would see down in a Lincoln or a Roseville, not to that magnitude.
Yeah, this one might be, but not like Lincoln.
No, that's about 75,000 more people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have, when we were talking about the 10,000 foot raise, like what fraction of that would actually become available? And, I was hearing it was something significantly less than what's actually.
So
No, I know, but I'm just wondering, I haven't seen that in the 50,000 acre foot.
We're just not there yet.
Oh, okay.
She hasn't flipped to that one yet.
Okay, thank you.
Michael, before we get to you, can I please, get your wife's comment, because she's been hanging on a little bit. Laura Peters asked that the actual water demand was input into the new demand model. Is actual demand the number of miners inches of acre feet of water contracted for annually? No, it wasn't based off of, water sold. And then Jeff Linton asked, in a 2015 board meeting, the estimate of Rollins sediment was estimated around 26,000 acre feet. Is that still the estimate? And is there consideration to couple the dam with raising sediment removal? At this point, we have talked about sediment removal, and we have talked about raising the dam. We have not talked about any type of combo project. That would be something you would address in the future. It was addressed in the matrix. Sediment removal is very expensive. But as Michael brought up, keeping sediment out is probably the way to go and what to look into. Yeah.
Gravel operations.
It could be. So, and that was it. Okay, answer this. All right. You're in.
What I got out of the discussion and the question that the gentleman before me asked was water for a rainy day, or water for a drought day, better if I can put it. And so in drought contingency planning, if we're trying to plan for a mega drought, a 10-year mega drought, then keeping water behind the reservoir as many years as possible prepares the district, the people, for that case. When the mega drought comes, climate change is supposed to be bringing to us. So such a raise would be not a moratorium on building, but a moratorium on leaving the water behind the reservoir for the mega drought. That's what I heard when you asked the question. And so it doesn't have anything to do with stopping, it doesn't have anything to do with stopping progression of development in the county. It has everything to do with preparation of drought, okay, of conservation of water and preparing for the worst case scenario.
If I could speak to that point, was it Aaron's, I think?
Yeah, Aaron.
About, we would be remiss if we went through this whole process, identified a need for more water just to maintain status quo. And we would be remiss in saying, well, now we're gonna sell water, we can make money. Because we are here because we have a potential of being short in a drought scenario. That's why we're having this conversation. And the models do take into account the demand model takes into account the new construction. We've put all those things, we've considered all those things already, and we are having to rub the crystal ball to come up with those numbers. And that's not to say it's gonna change, but I think we've done a good job of doing that already. So that would be my position going forward, that we would be,
I'd like to hear that.
that would not,
Yeah, I know.
that would not be a
What's
good,
the point?
a good,
Yeah.
position to be in.
Okay. So now, just the description of Centennial Reservoir, similar to the other two. So it's located downstream of Rollins and upstream of Kobe. The operating storage that we simulated was 96,700 acre feet of a total of capacity of 110,000 acre feet. It was modeled without a powerhouse. That's notable. And we're just assumed a 5 CFS minimum flow requirement downstream, because that's the existing minimum flow requirement downstream of Combe. But as we've talked about, this will probably get increased if Centennial were built. It does fill in most years. So just because of its location, the storage would be exclusively used to meet Lake Combe demands. But it does make more water available at Rollins, able to meet NID demands along the Bear River Canal. So it kind of frees up the Rollins storage for that. And similar to our other alternatives, less water needs to be exported from the Yuba into Bear River, increasing the available water to Deer Creek. And so this is the frequency of full delivery allocation, and it's similar to the 50,000 acre foot Rollins rate. Some considerations: cost benefit ratio. It's costly. There would be extensive environmental and right-of-way concerns. It's generally oversized for its delivery benefits. If you look at the simulated storage, it doesn't get drawn down too much, and that's, you know, evidenced by how many years it fills. But this is assuming that 5 CFS environmental flow requirement. So if you add a higher environmental flow requirement, it may be properly sized.
Right, so on a brand new storage facility, you would expect to see some fairly hefty environmental flows. In that case, then you would be filling more, right? Because you'd be drawing down more because you're releasing more water. The one thing, I think this one is complicated just on the face of it, if you don't remember that when you compare Centennial to Rollins, Centennial doesn't quite provide the delivery benefit because of the location of Centennial. It's lower than Rollins, and there's a service territory that is fed by the Bear River Canal that comes off of Rollins because it's higher. So the available area of benefit for Centennial is smaller than the available area of benefit for Rollins. I know that can be a little bit confusing. Okay.
Yes.
Also, in my work as a civil engineer, oversized for delivery benefits rings a bell of promoting growth. So, we were prohibited in many instances in building capacity into public works that would promote growth and wasn't built for the actual demand. So oversized for delivery benefits rings that bell for me. And you might think about that even on Rollins, that if you have overcapacity, that it promotes growth, and developers will come in and they will start to zero in on lands in the district for growth, and it won't be big acre parcels. It will be multifamily and denser populations.
I think we already talked about this. The lower elevation location limits its delivery benefits. It can only be used to meet demands off of Combi. You can't pump it upstream to use it higher in the system. It does negatively affect hydropower generation, and this will be summarized in later slides, but it's just here, a placeholder. The in-stream flow requirement is likely going to be high, but like we said, we don't know what that is. Okay, we finally get into some model output. Yay! Okay, so let me set up these slides for you guys. So this is a slide showing the average annual delivery in acre feet. And so we've got the demand as that flat line across all of the bars. So that's what the model is trying to deliver. But the bars are what the model was able to deliver. So on the left, no storage increase, that's our baseline. And so these scenarios right now, these are all the wet climate, low demand scenario. And we've got our unmet demand, and then we've got our scenarios to the right of it, the Rollins 10K raise, the Rollins 50K raise, and then the Centennial Reservoir. And the number above those bars is the increase in average annual delivery above the no storage option.
That would be the figure you would factor out for revenue or income. I mean, if you're gonna build a dam and like Rollins 50,000, and you're only gonna increase deliveries by 5,100 acre feet, you'd have to factor that per acre foot into the revenue stream, right?
Yeah, but the unmet demand was not that high to begin with.
Right.
If you look at where the demand is compared to where that bar is.
Yeah.
And that is not the case in some of our other
Right.
figures we're gonna see.
Doug, you were shaking your head. Can you?
Well, I think it's a little more complicated than just.
That's kind of what I was thinking, so I kind of wanted you to weigh in on it.
It's, yeah, well, the numbers you're talking about
Yeah,
though,
right.
it's not that overly complicated. It's generally close to that.
Okay, now I'm really confused. He's shaking his head, and
Because
you're saying.
he's an engineer, and he's trying to make it overly complicated.
And you're
Explain
playing
yourself.
Haggerty.
And we're just the board.
Yeah. So you have to remember that this is also mitigating and helping in drier years to some of those other folks, right? So when there's the carryover storage, when there's more water sitting in the system to help meet those deliveries,
Mhm.
those are folks that are already getting that demand. Does that make sense? In other words, if we're only delivering 90%,
Mhm.
then those folks are getting delivered and 10% is not. But depending on the, even in a wet scenario, remember, there's dry periods in a wet scenario.
Right.
So some of that 90% would be not met during a wet year scenario, or during the dry cycle in the wet year scenario.
Remember, I think what he's trying to say is that this is showed as annual average. This is not
Yes.
showing 3-year dry scenarios where you're gonna be, in my mind, I'm just smoothing revenue out, right? In his mind, he's,
Got it.
yeah, taking into account
Thank you, Doug.
swings.
Thank you, Doug.
In some years, we were meeting full demand already,
Right.
and so there was no benefit in those years. But the other years when there was shortages, unmet demand, then that helps in those years, but it's smoothed across the entire period of record.
And we're looking at a 50-year period, so for revenue purposes, we're smoothing.
So this is the median baseline demand, so same information, average annual demand in acre feet. You can see the relative increase in deliveries to each of the 3 scenarios.
Can you explain, or can somebody explain why with 50,000 acre feet, the numbers appear to be better than building Centennial at 110,000?
Because remember, where Rollins has a service area benefit that is larger than Centennial, because Centennial is lower.
Okay, so.
And the Bear River Canal services territory off of Rollins that Centennial can't get to because it's too low.
That's why it doesn't get drawn down.
Right.
Yeah, not as well located.
In an ideal world, you'd push the reservoir as higher up because you have gravity feeding a larger area. The lower you get, the smaller the area. And the Bear River Canal comes off of Rollins.
So it feels to me kind of counterintuitive, even though we have more water sitting in this box, the deliveries are greater because of its location.
It has another arm coming out of it, yeah.
Okay.
Even with the addition of trying to reoperate to more effectively use the upper watershed resource, it's still not as effective as the Rollins race.
And you took into account the Deer Creek, Yuba River, all that, increased deliveries?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so this is the dry climate, high demand scenario. So similar here, the Rollins 50K increases, produces more benefit.
And this is where water gets more expensive in the open market.
And dry?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
I mean, as high as 700, 800 acre foot,
Yeah, south of Delta could pay up to 2,000.
even 500, yeah. And 500 and 600, Northern California even.
Yeah.
Is there a height on Centennial Dam lower than what you modeled that would give you 90% of the benefit? Seems like if it's never being drawn down, you don't need to make it so big.
Right.
Yes, the unknown is the environmental flow requirement.
It's the in-stream flow.
Get that answer before.
I doubt that.
Also, yeah, Doug and I did have a conversation about this today. We don't know how much it lowers the impact area. Because remember, the inundation area is wide and flat. Because that dam's not very tall.
Proposed?
But
Probably in
Centennial,
here.
we're talking about Centennial.
Yeah,
I can look at it.
probably that.
Okay, so this slide shows the average annual unmet demand. So it's kind of the flip-flop of what we were just thinking about and looking at. So on the left, we've got our no storage increase, so that's our baseline. And then we've got the 3 scenarios to our right. And remember that the orange is the dry climate, high demand, green is medium climate, baseline demand, and blue is wet climate, low demand. So they're all included on this. You can see each one. But, you know, of the 3, Rollins is definitely showing more benefit as far as being able to meet unmet demand for these 3.
Cool.
Okay, so now we're looking at carryover storage. So this is the amount of water that's remaining in all of NID reservoirs at the end of the irrigation season. So in this case, this is the average November 1st storage. And so we've got our no storage increase on the left, and then the relative difference in our 3 scenarios compared back to the storage increase on the right. And this is for the wet climate, low demand scenario.
But, this slide and the next coming slides, do they include the water that is operationally held over behind the dam for hydroelectric purposes or not?
All of the water. All of the water in each of
Okay.
reservoir storage.
If you look at a scenario where hydroelectric was not a factor and it was, let's just say, magic disappeared, was that scenario looked at?
So in the model, the water that's released for deliveries and environmental flow requirements, those are run through the powerhouses, but there are no rules in any of the reservoirs for discretionary releases for hydropower. So it's just a ancillary benefit. So what you get on the side.
Yeah, we operate the system to the benefit of water supply, not, whereas PG&E operates to the benefit of hydropower production.
So let me make sure I understood what you said. Your model assumes that hydro is only being generated for when water's flowing for other reasons. You're not flowing any water just for hydro in the model.
Yes.
I think another way to look at that is that the water that you have to release, you might as well turn a turbine and generate some electricity while you do it, since you got to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Average annual carry forward storage is?
Well, the
36, that's right in that range, yeah. It was what, 92 this year? End of the season carryover, October.
Yeah, thank you.
So same statistic, but we're looking at median climate, baseline demand. And this is the dry climate, high demand. Now we're going to look at generation. So this plot shows the average annual generation difference compared to the no storage increase scenarios. And so the vertical scale on these figures are in gigawatt hours, but the percentages are relative to the baseline. So you can get an absolute number difference and then the percent change difference. And so you get an increase in generation from both the Rollins 10K and Rollins 50K increase. And so you're getting more head and you're generally operating the same, so you're generating more. But you get a reduction in generation with the Centennial Reservoir, and that's for a couple of reasons. Some water, like we've talked about, reoperation of the upper system, water is going to Deer Creek instead of running down the drum system, where there's a lot more generation potential. So there's less water going down that side of the system, and then also, because Rollins is operating different, it's operating just to meet the demands in the Bear River Canal, and the minimum in-stream flow requirements below the diversion dam. So without Centennial, Rollins makes releases for the Bear River Canal, plus releases for the Combie demand that exceed the minimum in-stream flow requirement. So you end up releasing less out of Rollins, and so you generate less.
Yeah. This goes with what Jennifer said, we operate for water, hydro.
Right, and coming back to the point that we didn't simulate a powerhouse at Centennial.
The current Centennial water right application does not include a water right for hydropower use. There was some thought that, you know, back in the day, that they would add hydropower some point after Centennial was built.
It was a $500,000 application fee that stopped it,
I don't know that that was I think it was the FERC process.
possibly.
I don't, Kean would know more, I wasn't here. I can't see Kean though.
I do have a question for Kean.
The original applications included a hydroelectric facility?
Did not.
No, the original project scoping, internal scoping.
No, the records at the water board show different.
It could, it's not in there now.
And I believe you might have a problem if you did the CEQA for a dam without hydro and purposely knew that you were gonna add it back in. That's called, parsing the project under CEQA. Not allowed.
Yeah, we currently don't have a project, so we're all good. Yeah.
So you don't have a Centennial water supply project?
That is, we've been in, as we've stated several times at the administrating hearing office, we went back to the drawing board to do a full alternatives analysis, so there's been no identified preferred alternative.
Okay, but you're having Centennial as one of the possible alternatives right now.
This is just a real preliminary scoping, not even scoping, identification of any potential project to move forward that would then go through the full CEQA analysis.
So
You can't
Centennial is an alternative that's looked at in the model.
So you're not allowed to pre-select an alternative under CEQA.
No, you actually do define a preferred alternative.
You have to identify the environmentally superior alternative. Okay.
So those CEQA request that you identify, so environmentally preferred among the alternatives that are looked at under CEQA to meet the problem or the issue that the projects address.
But I think that's what this process is all about, Mike, is that we're looking at the different alternatives, so, you know, we're just scoping them out. We haven't made a
I'm just
decision.
hoping to clarify.
Well, you were stating that Centennial is the project, and that's not the case.
It's not a project.
Okay.
We stated that in writing on the filings to the administrative hearing officer. We can resend them.
So I had a quick question, probably Kean also. There's a second tube in Rollins. Is Rollins was filling this week or last week? How often does that happen, and is there, you don't give me an answer today, but how much generation would that second tube make in money?
I don't have a number for that.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, there is potential for a second powerhouse at Rollins. And that was included in our application.
And we've talked about that, quite openly, about, if we do the Rollins raise, that we would want to make adding a powerhouse part of it whenever it was appropriate to capture the power and.
Yeah, you'd want to leverage the storage as much as possible
Then
from
we
a
need to
revenue
figure
perspective.
out how much spillage there is.
We know how much spillage there is. The spill at Rollins is well defined, yep.
That's it.
It's typically Rollins that starts spilling early in the year.
Pictures taken.
Thank you.
Right. So we're moving on. We're going to look at the extended irrigation scenarios. So the proposal is to deliver irrigation water through October 31st. Right now in the model, or our assumption is that the irrigation season goes through October 15th. Keep municipal deliveries the same, no change there. And to shift the outage on the Bear River Canal to accommodate the additional irrigation flows through October 31st, and so that would have to be worked out with PG&E. And so the average annual increase in demand is as stated here. So Deer Creek, Bear River Canal, Lake Combie, and those systems is 3, 4.5, and 3.5% increase relative to the existing annual demand. So here is a summary of each one of these scenarios. We've got the dry high in the first column, the median baseline in the second, and the wet low in the third. And so the current irrigation deliveries, or demands, sorry, are in the first row. The new demands with the extended irrigation season is the second row, and the difference is the third row. And so this is what is simulated by the model, how much is able to be delivered. So you can see that there is additional demand that the delivery that doesn't quite meet the demand. And so the third part of this table is the additional unmet demand, which is basically the difference of the two upper sections. So like, for example, for dry high, the demand increases 6,300 acre feet, and what's actually able to be delivered is 5,100, and then so the additional unmet demand is 1,200.
I have a question about this. Would this be able to be modeled with, let's say, the 50,000 acre feet of Rollins raised? Because we have gotten requests from our ag community to extend the irrigation season due to climate change. And so I'm just wondering if these two ideas were married. Is that a modeling thing that we could look at some point?
I don't know that you need to model it.
You don't think we need to model it?
But
But
what do you think?
Would it be true then that the 50,000 Rollins raise would allow for the extended irrigation system, season rather, without?
You'd still have an issue over in Deer Creek because
Yeah.
none of that water is really available,
Right.
besides the reoperation of the upper.
And that small benefit you get.
Yeah, okay, that was just curious.
So it'd be difficult in Deer Creek, but in off of the Combie and the Bear River Canal, there's potential there.
So I'll also add, though, that thinking is what gets us sort of dangerously close to this. We're trying to save water for our not a rainy day fund. By extending the irrigation system, we're making a bigger straw by extending that irrigation system, and so it's a dangerous game.
One thing I would recommend is, and I haven't spoken with customer service about this, is we need to better track actual requests on extension of irrigation.
How much demand there is.
Yeah, because we hear, you start
Hear it,
hearing
right.
things anecdotally, and I want to start gathering some more info so we can start gauging.
I'll tell you also where the difference encounter what Aaron's saying. For a farmer, I mitigate it because I put storage on the farm. So we can go through that, through that expense.
Dry period.
So we can go an extra month or two. Not every farm to ranch can do that. And if they do, sometimes they dry up in that period of time. Profits are gone. They can't afford to rejuvenate the pasture land, or if it might be crops. So sometimes we have fall water available, winter water on some canals, not all. If we lose the ability as a farmer rancher to pay for the water by not having that water for 2-3 weeks, and it's dry, hot, or whatever, that I think hurts the district more than losing maybe 3,000 or 6,000 acre feet of water. And I don't think it'd be that much, but.
Challenges, I see it. I don't But one, of my colleagues shared a picture of, fields in December after we had rain, and they were bone dry. And so that's an example where really extending the season 2 weeks isn't going to solve the problem that our agricultural community is gonna face with climate change. The other thing I would raise is that probably 3 years ago, we had a bone dry spring.
Right.
And I can tell you, as a flower farmer, waiting for I mean, that ground was just bone dry. And the minute those canals opened up, everybody was pulling the water off because everyone was in the same boat. So I just worry about if we identify a 2-week extension, maybe we say, you know what, for the cost, maybe we could justify it. But then I think, where's it end? Because as this year would show, it wouldn't have been a solution. In that spring, it wouldn't have been a solution. And so I think you have to, what is our overall strategy? How can we help the ag community as best we can? And
there's something you gotta consider though, and this costs money, some operations can afford it, some can't. Is you're not trying to replace the rain. You couldn't do that. There's never be enough water to do that. What you're trying to do is refill the ponds so that you can pump for another month. So that's what people are asking for in the fall, is help me keep my pond full so that I have water all the way through March. And we just had this request from Turkey Creek. Like, you give me anything, a little drizzle, because the ponds are emptying more and more every year. And then, now I gotta turn on the well. So I mean, that's not, trees or what have you, but that's what I would need. It's just, is my pond's full? I'm good.
So this year, we came that close just 2 weeks ago to drawing the pond down, because we were getting more. 2 years ago, it was right at the end of the season, and then we just barely made it. Pond right now is full.
How many years ago did you build your pond?
12.
I think this is a larger conversation we should have, because I do think that there could potentially be some more micro solutions with ponds,
No, I agree.
Yeah, I think it's not just extending it 2 weeks.
Right.
It's a combination of storage on-prem and extending it 2 weeks and having the ability to pump. And yeah, I agree with you that just give them 2 weeks this year. I showed you pictures. At the end of November, the fields were dry.
Because I'm also curious of how many people don't have ponds or storage tanks.
Quite a few.
Yeah.
And it actually, it's probably more cost effective.
It's probably more cost effective for them to be putting in ponds than to be building, than extending the irrigation season, but we should look at it.
Yeah, maybe we put together a program.
Our conservation program.
Yeah.
I mean, we started with the tank this year, so. I just think there's other solutions that we should talk about.
I agree.
And I think we should understand the scope of the issue.
Yeah, and this is conversation I know that Aaron from Circle and I've had, is more looking at micro storage.
Yeah.
The point is, it's an issue.
Yeah, I think this is some good data though. This gives us a teeing off point to talk about it, yeah. Michael?
All right, I stood up because I love what you're saying right now. I love what you just said, Rich, and what you said, Karen and Trevor, and what you just said. Water conservation and the measures that we can do, and you can go to the board and ask for appropriations during the winter, and you can move water all year round, and it can be part of a conservation program that's parcel-based and even smaller than parcel-based, field-based for agricultural purposes, but you have to understand the water balance on each field that's water supplied to. Now, you're gonna have non-crop irrigated areas. And if you know what's going on right now with the Department of Water Resources and the Water Board, they've already sent NID the information for irrigated lands, irrigable, non-irrigable lands, and all those areas that are mapped for water conservation objectives. So said, needs to be investigated, and you can actually, I think, show a demand reduction that would likely meet a lot of what you're showing on these slides. So I think that you need a separate meeting for water conservation measures that can be applied in combination with additional water rights to move water operationally to places during the time that they need you to meet your farming needs.
All right, we have a couple of comments online. Mr. Linton states, building Centennial with 110,000 acre feet of storage. The petition for water from the state was 221,000 acre feet of storage. If we had to petition the state for more water for raising Rollins, will we be asking to remove 50,000 acre feet, or will we ask for twice that like Centennial? You know, we'd have to look at it. I think it's a more complex question as it relates to what of our existing water rights we could use versus would we need any portion of that state filed water right application. But good question. And then Laura Peters says, I think she's on the same thought process as everybody just was. Perhaps NID could work with multiple commercial ag users to help build ponds or get tanks. And just so everybody knows, we are piloting a smaller program right now, but if you haven't checked that out, please do. And then one more comment. Top the storage up in October so they can use it over the winter. Yeah. Along the lines of what Director Calder was stating. All right.
So we just blew by extended irrigation season, so that's gonna be a big diversion.
Well, I think it's a more complex conversation, but I think the benefit is that we were able to do some modeling, so we have a little bit of a better idea, and it kick-started some good thoughts. So put a pin in that. Coming back to it.
If you build a pond, they will come.
Yeah, I mean, micro storage could be a good solution for some of it.
So this is just another slide along the extended irrigation season, just showing that the November 1st carryover storage, average November 1 storage goes down. I mean, that kind of makes sense. Okay, so now back to big picture. So this is we're going to start showing a few summary slides. So this is the wet climate low demand. This is just summarizing the delivery increase, which is the converse of the unmet demand. At least for the Rollins 10, Rollins 50, and Centennial, the extended irrigation district. It's on this slide just to summarize what we've shown previously in slides. The carryover storage increase. And the generation increase or decrease. And then this gets back to the changes in the what is exported from the Yuba system to the Deer Creek and the Bear River. So this is showing a summary of what is the increase in exports to the Deer Creek versus the decrease in exports to the Bear. And so similar summary for the heating climate baseline demand scenarios. We've got deliveries and demand at the top. Again, carryover storage. I'm going fast through these because we've already looked at all of this. This is all existing information in other slides. But this is just keeping it all in one spot, one-stop shop.
Appreciate it.
Yes. And then the changes to the exports again. And then same set of data, except for the dry climate, high demand. Okay, next step.
All right. So we are going to, we're taking 1 to 2 more meetings. We are going to do some additional analysis of the storage options and really dive a little bit more into some of, I think we learned some things maybe about Centennial today that we hadn't heard before, didn't know, inherently know. I'm sure Megan did because she knows our system best. But for some of the rest of us, and I think staff is getting to a position where we're becoming more comfortable with making some recommendations on whether or not things should be moving forward anymore or not. And then we also want to take a further look at the PG&E supply that we were able to purchase through our coordinated operating agreement. There is an ability to purchase additional water through PG&E. We want to better understand how that water is impacted through the climate change model. And with that said, there is a caveat that that is contract water, right? So at some point, those contracts could change. But I do think that it's worth taking another look at that water to alleviate some of the unmet demands.
And that would also, we could do under the 218 process, charge a little different rate for that water, and you just blend it in.
No, you would just blend it. I would recommend it's just included as an expense every year, so that if you need it, you have adequate money to buy it. And there's some other complications with this. That is something I want to look at. What I'm getting at is that, we have kind of we have all these options. We have a suite of storage augmentation options that are pretty expensive. And there is some concern about the benefit they will actually achieve due to the location in which they are. There is also, I have some fairly significant concern related to the unknown of the in-stream flow requirements and the extractions the state is going to make, given what we are going through right now with the Bay Delta Plan. If the Bay Delta Plan and unimpaired flow standard went into effect, you'll need more storage. We have a whole different issue. But I do want to come up with kind of another package that we could also look at that is less costly. And could also take into account, address if unimpaired flow standards went into effect. So that would also include further analysis of carryover storage. I've brought this up several times. We haven't broached the topic because I don't know if we know how it impacts it. The in-stream flows that were negotiated during the FERC relicensing project were negotiated using a different model. There was recently, there has been more recent acceptance from the regulatory agencies to include climate change modeling in those analysis for the in-stream flow requirements. It's basically a water supply model. So what I'd also like to look at is there any benefit from in either the above normal year or the normal year to decrease inflow stream requirements to increase carryover storage going into a dry year? Does that alleviate some of this pain? That's a hard conversation. That is completely up to negotiations. That was a 13-year negotiating process. Some people they get mad when I even say it. But, if everybody can get...
The world has changed.
The world has changed, but if everybody can get a little bit, then maybe we can get there with less pain. Right. So, that's kind of my recommendations, and then we would finalize recommendations for the option matrix analysis. And then anything that would have to know if any type of vote would be on what to keep carrying forward. Because after this point, we're past the preliminary analysis. It's some real money. We would be talking to analyze specific projects. My idea would be any type of vote like that, that'd be done in a formal board meeting. That's formal board action. So the next meeting with Plan for Water would kind of be finalizing the storage alternatives. We'd be making some staff recommendations on, and if we can get our arms wrapped around the PG supply and the carryover storage, and then kind of finalize the operation matrix analysis. How's that sound?
Yep.
Okay. Michael.
Yeah, it's been a really good meeting. I've enjoyed participating in it. I'm kind of wanting to know I'm still kind of confused on the plan for water process or plan. So I want to go back to that for a minute and ask, just directly, is there, other than the slides and the presentations and the matrix and the table that's presented today, to me, those are all documents, and they're all planning documents. But I want to know when the board is actually presented with alternatives for the planning scenarios, which have been presented already in the plan for water meeting. I want to know specifically who is preparing those, because when you look at the table, there's no reference to who actually prepared it, who actually is performing the feasibility studies, the cost benefit ratios. I think your company did a wonderful job. So I'm wondering,
Who prepared the table?
who is preparing all of the
Data and everything.
who's preparing the planning documents? These are planning documents. So who is actually the author of the planning document?
I'm not quite sure what I follow you, but maybe this will address your question. So there are technical memorandums that are being prepared for the demand model, the reservoir operations, that will document all of those items. We will then take everything, collate it together, and wrap it up kind of into this final product. Now, we are talking through, do we envision, the 8-inch binder, is that necessary? Could be, will be something of that nature, probably. What I am always opposed to is large binders that sit on the shelf and no one ever looks at. But we will document, everything will be documented to the extent that it supports how it was developed, what the basis was, the consulting firm, assumptions, all of that. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I think so. So basically, I wrote a question so I could try to clarify it. Is there a list of plan for water planning documents being prepared? The status of each of those documents and the author of each of those documents identified. So if you're going to have a technical memorandum, again, that comes out and gives the board alternatives in the planning of the public works, then I want to know, in the planning of the public works, the planning scenarios, that's under the professional code of engineering. Okay? In order to actually present the board with planning alternatives for public works, it's actually part of the business and professional code and the rules, regulations in California. And if you're interested in this, I've prepared something that would explain it to you.
I think you've given it to me before, but I'll take it again.
Yeah, I'll give it to you. I've got copies of it here. And I actually, and I wrote the definition for the NID with respect to its role as a state agency, as a water supplier. And I won't read it, but I will send it electronically so you can post it also, okay? And I didn't want to disrupt this meeting with this because I didn't want it to be contentious, all right? But I will read one clause here. It says, professional engineering within the meaning and intent of this act refers to a person engaged in the professional practice of rendering service or creative work requiring education, training, and experience in engineering sciences of professional and creative work as consultation, investigation, evaluation, planning, or design of the public or private utilities. And it goes on to say that only qualified professional engineers can actually present this data to the decision-making body, okay? So I want to see a list of all the
We'll cover it, Michael. There's a slew of engineers that have been involved, yeah. All right, so we're gonna just wrap this up with a couple of questions. Laura or Jeff Clinton, thank you for looking at these alternatives. Raising Rollins looks like it would only back up Bear River about a mile or less. Significantly less impact at 8.5 miles of Centennial. So NID will find many more supporters for this proposal. Thank you, Mr. Linton. Why aren't the technical documents published as they are prepared so we can all be informed going into the meetings? Because they are not completely prepared yet, and part of the document is the result. So those are not published, but will be. All right, I think that's it.
So Jeff Linton, you're on record as supporting Rachel Mullins?
Adjourned.
Thanks, Judge.
May I make a quick comment?
Sure.
Yeah.
This is Gary.
Yeah.
I think I had my hand up.
Oh.
Zimmerman, it's not Jeff.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say back to the cost stuff, I mean, it might be a good idea to figure out, talk to the bond rating agencies, find out, what you borrow. Because that may determine which projects are economically feasible, let alone, engineering feasible. So just a suggestion. Thank you very much. A lot of work's gone into that.
Okay, thanks. We're out of here.